Alright, hello and welcome to Hex Bash Plays, and today we're going to be taking a look at the GeForce GTX 680. Now, this is an EVGA card. It has 2 gigabytes of GDDR5 RAM, which does allow it to keep up in most major titles, and for testing, we're going to be using a Ryzen 7 1700 with DDR4 3200 megahertz Vegeance RAM from Corsair. The PC is liquid cooled, which we will be able to see in one of the videos that I'm going to attach here. However, let's just get into the benchmarks and go over everything throughout the video. Alright, so first up we have Overwatch, which is a not very, it's an esports title for sure, but I enjoy it quite a bit. And if you can see the numbers on the side there, the CPU utilization is about 50 to 45 to 60% around, hovering around there, so that means that we're not getting bottlenecked. We're getting about 98% GPU utilization, which is exactly what you want. You want it to be going as hard as it can. It's at 1920 by 1080p, and we're getting about 100 to 120 frames per second, so I'd call right around 100 frames per second is what you can expect on average in most maps with this card, which is really good, especially if you're just looking to play esports titles. Now, you're not going to be playing anything super AAA at maximum settings or anything, but I built this computer as it is, which I'm using an RX 580 to be an esports machine anyway, just trying to get the maximum frames out of it. But hopefully with Navi coming soon, I'll be upgrading to that. But anyway, that's beside the point. So even in firefights, we're not getting too many dips as far as frames go, so that means that we're just doing really good here. I'll be playing as Diva or Orisa. I like both of those. Lucio's pretty good too. Let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and skip this character select screen because it takes so long. But with that edit out of the way, let's go ahead and move forward a little bit. Okay, so I did end up picking Diva after all instead of Lucio because we needed a tank, and I did very horrible this round, so please don't think that's the graphics card's fault. That's just me in general. But even in these firefights, we're staying right around the 90 frames per second, so this is definitely very playable at this speed. So yeah, I highly recommend the 680 for this game, but let's go on. Okay, so next up I decided to use the GTA 5 benchmark tool. I went through and just played the whole thing and recorded it. So as you can tell, we're getting about 70 to I want to say it jumped up as high as 75 frames per second. Yep, there it goes. And of course it'll go to 144 during the black scenes where it's blacked out. But anyway, overall I would say that this would be a great card for GTA 5. Even though the game is obviously a little bit older, it has aged very well though. Still looks great even to this day at 1080p, and this graphics card will definitely do everything you need it to as far as that goes. So I again highly recommend the 680 if you are looking for a budget graphics card around $100. Next up, I'm going to be doing CSGO, or sorry, not CSGO, but Apex Legends. And Apex Legends actually struggled a little bit, as you'll see in our video. But looking at GTA 5 here, I mean, the game just looks gorgeous. I mean, it looks flawless from my perspective. I mean, you're getting a very respectable 85 frames per second out of this scene here. Now, one of the other things to note is that I am hooked up to a 144 hertz monitor. If you don't have one of those, then a 60 hertz monitor will be just fine. And you can definitely find some pretty good 60 hertz monitors out there. I would suggest an IPS panel over a TN if you can find it. But if you can find a 144 hertz monitor, even though this doesn't support FreeSync, which my monitor does, I did not notice too much tearing or other things when I was playing. So again, I would definitely highly suggest checking into that, because it is definitely worth it to get a high refresh rate monitor to pair with this graphics card. And also in this particular scene, you'll notice that we're about to go into the explosion, and the explosion definitely does take a hit to the frames per second like it's supposed to. That's exactly what we're testing here. However, I did notice that when you run the benchmark, it does some weird things. It doesn't always do the exact same thing. I mean, it does mostly the same things in order, but I think what it's trying to showcase is the randomization of the world and various scenarios that you can encounter. Like, all of this is the same, but one thing I've noticed when it gets to the truck, there might be more or less vehicles crowded around it. So, okay, and up next we have Apex Legends. One thing I wanted to note is, I don't know, it looked weird when it was recording for me originally in Open Broadcast software, but I think it'll be just fine. But the two things I wanted to showcase at the very beginning, number one was the graphics settings that I used. It was a mix of high and low settings, medium mostly, for the 1080, but you'll notice that the frames per second aren't that great here. Yeah, and the other thing that you'll notice too as we move along here, when we go to jump out, the frames per second definitely take a hit as we're making our way to the ground. And then once we get on the ground, I did a quick shot cut towards the end of the match, because there was just a lot of running around and it was almost 20 minutes of footage and I didn't feel like using all of that. So I cut it down for time's sake. But once we do get on the ground here, you'll see that our FPS goes to about, I want to say, yeah, so it was 40 frames per second flying through the sky, and then we get on the ground, trying to sync this up as best as I can. It takes forever to fall out of the sky for some reason, but anyway. So we're on the ground and we're getting about 60 frames per second, and then you'll notice this cut here, and we're in a firefight, and we drop down to about 45, well, down as low as 35 frames per second. So you'll get anywhere from 30 to 60. It'll fluctuate quite a bit in this game with the GTX 680, which is expected because of the 2 gigabytes of VRAM. So but overall, very playable experience for an esports title, and I wouldn't be upset if this was the only card that I could use to game on. Okay, and last up we have CSGO, which is one of the most popular titles for esports gaming, and you'll see here that we're getting well over 100 frames per second. And one of the things to note is that CSGO does favor NVIDIA cards over AMD. So I did notice that some of the performance here is actually almost better than my RX 580, or at least on par. So, but this game is very old. It came out in 2012, the same year as this graphics card. So it's probably the most optimized out of all of them. So I would definitely highly recommend the 680 if all you want to play is CSGO. But to note with that, you're going to want to pair it with a good CPU. anything from Intel 1155, I want to say, which is their Gen 3 or Ivy Bridge processors, all the way up to whatever we are on now, which I think is Coffee Lake, which is the i9 series, or obviously like myself here, I'm using a Ryzen 7 1700, but you can use a Ryzen 3 or even a Ryzen 5 if you're going the budget route. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, we're getting about 150 to 180 frames per second on this map, but this is also Mirage. I did not try Dust 2 or any of the other maps due to time's sake, but you can expect anywhere from 100 to 150 frames per second on most maps. You might get some dips down to like 60 or 70, but overall you're going to get a very playable experience with this card. So I'm going to go ahead and do a conclusion here, and we'll just move on to that. Okay, so conclusion, my thoughts on the 680. This is actually a very powerful card. I had never used one before, and my experience with NVIDIA was way back when I used to have a Radeon HD 8770 or something like that, or an 8750, I can't remember. But my actual first card was a GTX 560 Ti, and after that I kind of just skipped all of the GPUs, and I stopped playing games because I needed to get a job and all that other stuff back then. But anyway, overall this is a great card, like I said before, and I would highly recommend going out to get one if you're on a strict or very tight budget. You can pick them up on eBay for anywhere from $80 to $100, and it's definitely worth the price in my opinion. So anyway, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. Leave a like if you liked the video, dislike it if you didn't, and please subscribe, and thank you very much for watching again, and have a great day.